The saloon was loud in the way a snake rattles before it strikes, not joy, not music, just the sound of men killing time before something ugly happens. Glasses clinked against wood worn smooth by years of spilled whiskey. The piano player pounded out a tune that had died long before the man who wrote it, every note bent under the weight of too many nights and too many bullets. She sat alone in the far corner, half swallowed by shadow, brim of her hat pulled low enough to hide her eyes but not the faint curve of a smirk that could have meant anything, danger, defiance, or both. Her coat draped just so, hiding the shape of her hips, hiding everything else she wanted kept close. Cards slapped on the table nearby, coins scraped across wood. No one knew her name, but they'd all felt her the moment she stepped through the door. She carried silence with her, the kind that made even the drunkest man sit up a little straighter. The kind that made you check where your gun was before you dared breathe too loud. Then the quiet broke. He came from the bar, staggering with a bottle still in his hand, shoulders too broad for the doorway he'd just left. His boots thudded against the floor, steady as a drumbeat, slow as a noose being tightened. His voice was thick, his smile mean. "Ain't polite to drink alone," he said, though it sounded less like an invitation and more like a warning. He leaned over her table, letting his shadow spill over her like a storm cloud swallowing the sun. Without asking, without hesitating, he reached out and laid his hand on her arm. She didn't look at him. Didn't pull away. Her breathing didn't change. The only movement was the faintest curl of her fingers around the edge of the table. And then, in a voice so soft the room had to lean in to catch it, she whispered, "Don't touch me." It wasn't the words that made the air go cold, it was the weight behind them, the kind of weight that comes from having made that request before, and having learned what happens when it's ignored. Beneath the table, her right hand moved slow, steady, unhurried. Wood creaked. Cloth shifted. Metal whispered against leather. Her fingers wrapped around something colder than the desert night, heavier than the sins that brought her here. Some folks swear they saw the flash of steel in the lamplight. Others say the light died too quick for that. All agree the music stopped, the laughter died, and the smell of gunpowder seemed to drift in before the drunk's smile faltered, just a fraction. A bead of sweat slid down his temple. Somewhere behind him, a chair scraped back, boots shuffled, and someone muttered a prayer they hadn't used in years. Her thumb found the hammer. A single click, sharp enough to cut through every sound in the room. And then, nothing. No shot. No scream. Just black, swallowing the moment whole. Nione pulled a trigger. When the light came back, the saloon was gone. In its place was the whole of Dry Creek, spread out under a sun that burned everything it touched to the color of bone. The streets were the kind of empty that told you people were home, doors barred, watching through cracks in the curtains. Somewhere a dog barked once and then thought better of it. Word had traveled faster than a bullet, "The outlaw queen is here." They whispered it like a curse, or a prayer, depending on which side of the gallows you were on. Old men leaned on porch rails, chewing the same piece of tobacco they'd been working since sunrise, spitting into the dust as if to keep her name from sticking to their tongues. Up at the jailhouse, Sheriff Grady closed the blinds one slat at a time, then locked the door from the inside. He told his deputy to stay put and his wife to keep the rifle loaded. "Don't go out there for nothing short of Judgment Day," he said. And the way his voice shook, you'd swear he thought Judgment Day had just come early. Down the street, a wind kicked up, tossing grit into the air until it stung the eyes and coated the teeth. Through it came a shape on horseback, black against the white glare of noon. Slow, steady, not hiding and not hurrying, her coat flared in the wind, and the brim of her hat kept her face in shadow. What happened next was so fast some swore it never happened at all. A blur of movement, a flash of steel, and the man's hat hit the dirt before he even knew it was gone. He stood there, eyes wide, a thin red line blooming on his cheek where her blade had kissed him. She didn't smile. She didn't say a word. She just nudged her horse forward and left him standing in the dust, holding his hat like it was the last thing tethering him to the earth. No one came out to cheer. No one clapped her on the back. In Dry Creek, surviving an encounter with her was reward enough, but somewhere, watching from a shaded window, someone was already loading a rifle. The stables were quiet except for the restless shuffle of hooves and the low, wet sound of a horse chewing through its hay. Dust drifted down in the shafts of light cutting through the slats, the kind of light that made you feel like time had slowed to half its pace. She stood near the last stall, tightening the cinch strap on her mare, eyes down, mind somewhere else. Or so it seemed. The air shifted before the sound came, that sense you get when someone steps into a room who shouldn't be there. She didn't turn around. Didn't have to. Boots scuffed against the packed dirt, slow, deliberate. A shadow fell long across the straw. The horses shifted, sensing the tension. Outside, the wind rattled the stable door like it wanted in. "You should walk away," she said, voice flat as desert stone. "I've waited too long to walk away." He took another step, and she could hear the leather creak in his holster. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to nothing but the sound of breathing and the weight of hands inches from steel. Then, somewhere down the street, a bottle shattered. The noise broke the moment, just enough. He hesitated. She didn't. Some folks said she'd been a ranch hand down in Pecos County. Others swore she'd ridden with bank robbers through the Llano Estacado, leaving bodies cooling in the dust. Truth was, no one could agree on who she'd been before she came drifting into towns like this, but everyone agreed she carried the look of a woman who'd seen something worth killing over. Whispers followed her the way shadows follow at sundown. In the saloon, an old gambler with tobacco-stained teeth muttered to the barkeep that she once took a bullet through the lung and never flinched. A ranch widow said she'd buried a man alive. Neither story was certain. Both sounded true. Pinned to the wall outside the general store was a bounty poster, sun-faded, edges curling. The ink showed her face in hard lines, eyes narrowed just enough to warn you against trying your luck. $10,000, dead or alive. A fortune for the man reckless enough to collect. The paper fluttered in the wind, catching the attention of anyone who passed. Most glanced away. A few stared too long. She walked past without looking at it, though her pace slowed just enough to betray that she knew it was there. The stable smelled of sweat, dust, and old hay, the kind that's gone brittle from too many summers without rain. Somewhere deep in the shadows, a horse shifted, iron shoes clinking softly against the wood. She was saddling up when the sound came, a voice low, steady, and far too certain. "Haven't heard that name in a long time." She froze, her hand still on the cinch strap. The name he used wasn't one the folks in town knew. Wasn't even one she'd heard aloud in years. Her eyes didn't move to find him, but her body did, just enough to turn her side toward the sound, just enough to keep her right hand close to where the Colt rested. He stepped from the shadows like he'd been waiting all morning for this moment. Tall, unshaven, dust on his boots and something sharper in his gaze. "It's you," he said, the words more accusation than greeting. She gave the smallest shake of her head. "You're mistaken." Her voice was calm, but her grip on the worn leather of her holster tightened. Outside, a wagon rolled past, the wheels rumbling over packed dirt, but here in the stables, the air felt trapped, like the walls were holding their breath. Then, as quick as it started, he stepped back. Maybe it was the sound of boots outside the door, or maybe he saw something in her eyes that told him this wasn't the time. "We'll talk again," he said. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. She eased her hand away from the Colt, but her pulse stayed fast. The gunfight never came, not today. She led her horse out into the afternoon light, mounted in one smooth motion, and rode out without looking back. The town grew small behind her, the buildings sinking into the dust haze. But miles out, in the low dip of the land, another rider appeared. Just a speck at first, moving slow, but never stopping. She knew the type, the kind who could trail a rider for days, waiting for the moment when the land was empty enough and the air still enough that no one else would hear the shot. The sun dipped lower, throwing her shadow long over the earth. She didn't quicken her pace. If he wanted to follow, he'd have to keep up. She jolted awake, breath sharp, hand instinctively finding the revolver at her side. The fire in her camp had burned down to embers, but the air was wrong. Still. Watching. She didn't move, not yet. Her eyes drifted up the ridge, past the shadowed brush, to the darker shape against the night sky. A figure stood there, too still to be an animal, too patient to be a friend. No firelight touched them, but she knew the weight of that gaze. Someone had found her. Whether it was for revenge, bounty, or blood, didn't matter. They'd followed her here, to the edge of nowhere, and the only question left was, why tonight? The wire tapped out its warning in the sheriff's office long before dawn. No name signed, just a sentence that left the air colder than the night outside. If she's there, she's mine. Don't get in the way. The sheriff read it twice, jaw tight, eyes narrowing toward the empty street. He'd seen men fight for money, land, or pride, but this was personal. He folded the paper, slipped it in his vest, and poured himself a drink. Whatever storm was coming, it wasn't meant for him. But he knew better than to stand in its path. Out beyond the town's edge, she rode slow, keeping to the narrow road between the mesquite. The sun cut gold across the horizon, and dust rose in the wake of her horse. She found the man slumped by the roadside, hat tipped low, boot twisted in the stirrup. Most would have kept going. She didn't. She freed his leg, offered water, even a scrap of bread from her pack. For a moment, her face softened, edges dulling under the weight of something almost gentle. He thanked her with a voice like dry gravel, eyes never meeting hers, but when she turned to tend her horse, his hand slipped, quick, practiced, into her saddlebag. Whatever he took, he hid it well. By the time she swung back into the saddle, he was just another weary traveler on the road. She didn't notice the weight that was gone, not yet. The wind carried the scent of rain and trouble when she rode through the ranch gates. Her horse was lathered, eyes wild from the hard push. She didn't waste time on pleasantries, only asked for a man by name, her voice low, flat, without tremor. Said he owed her blood. Not money. Not land. Blood. The words sat heavy in the air, like lead shot in a tin pan. The rancher's hand hovered near his belt buckle, but he didn't move. From the porch, his wife froze, fingers gripping the wood rail tight enough to whiten her knuckles. Her eyes darted from the woman to the door, as if expecting shadows to slip through it. Recognition flickered there, sharp and certain, though she said nothing. Her lips trembled once before pressing into a line. Somewhere behind her, the floor creaked. The air thickened. Out past the fence line, shapes moved along the ridge, small against the horizon, but closing the distance. Not cattle. Not riders passing through. The kind of men who didn't ride in unless they planned to stay until the work was done. Somewhere between her words and the wife's silence, the first iron teeth of the trap had already begun to close. Midnight in the hills is a quiet thing, until it isn't. The first shot split the dark like glass under a hammer. Then came the second, closer. Muzzle flashes flared in the black, quick as lightning and twice as mean. Shadows moved between the barn and the fence line, their boots whispering over the dry dirt. She was already rolling off her bedroll before the third shot punched splinters from the corral post beside her head. She returned fire, but the night swallowed the sound. No faces, only the shapes of men who'd come to kill her. One rushed low, another high. The air reeked of powder. A bullet tore across her side, a hot, burning stripe that made her teeth grit, but didn't slow her hands. By the time the shooting stopped, the ground was littered with brass and silence. The kind of silence that's heavier than noise. She staggered toward the stables, one hand pressed to her side. A figure stood in the doorway, calm as a preacher, one she recognized. The stranger she'd helped on the road. Only now, he wasn't leaning on his cane. His hand was in her saddlebag. When he pulled it free, the moon caught the paper just enough for her to see. Not money. Not gold. A letter. Folded neat, worn at the edges. He turned it in his hand, reading what was written inside. Only one word. A name. She knew it before he spoke it, and that was the moment she realized the gunfire hadn't been meant to kill her, it had been meant to drive her right here. The wind carried the smell of burnt powder and cold iron. She stood in the half-light, blood drying at her side, staring at the paper like it might burn her fingers. The stranger's voice was low, almost careful, as if the name on that page could break the night itself. He read it once. She didn't move. Read it again. This time, it hit. The sound of it was heavier than any bullet she'd taken. It wasn't just a name. It was a ghost she'd buried years back, or thought she had. Her sister. The one she swore was gone to the dust, bones under some unmarked mound. But here it was, written clear, carried across miles, tucked away like a secret too dangerous to speak. If this was true, if she was alive, then the trail she'd been riding wasn't revenge anymore, it was rescue. And that made the stakes sharper, deeper. Somewhere in the dark, miles away, other men were hearing her name. Not with surprise, but with the slow grin of men who'd bet against her survival and lost. The same gang that had left her for dead was stirring again, like snakes waking in the sun. Word traveled fast in the territories, and before long, the news would find them all. She was breathing. She was moving. And now they'd come hunting, not to finish what they started, but to bury what they couldn't kill. The hinges groaned before the door even swung wide, and every glass in the place seemed to pause midair. She stepped in slow, not like someone arriving, but like someone coming back to finish a thing left undone. Smoke hung low, curling in the lamplight, and the air was warm with whiskey and the faint sting of sweat. Somewhere in the back, a piano key rang sharp and wrong, then fell silent. Even the men at the table stopped their cards mid-turn. From the far side of the room, a familiar stagger cut through the haze. The drunk from before. Same torn hat, same crooked smile, but this time, when he drifted close, she didn't lean in to whisper. She just smiled. Slow. The kind of smile that makes a man wonder if he's been walking toward his own grave. He stopped just shy of her shadow, and the room seemed to pull tight around them. Then they showed, 3 men at the back, wide-brimmed hats low, dust clinging to their coats like they'd ridden hard and fast to get here. Bounty hunters. They didn't move right away. Just stood there, eyes locked on her like they'd been paid not just to kill, but to savor the moment before it started. No one breathed too loud. No one reached for a drink. The world had narrowed to the space between her hand and the iron at her hip. They said the days of the outlaw queen were over. They said her crown was buried in the dust with the bones of her gang, and her name was just another whisper traded over cheap whiskey. But that night, under the flicker of lamplight and the smell of fear, the lie unraveled. 3 armed men came for her, certain they'd be the ones to collect her head and whatever bounty came with it. They were fast. She was faster. Steel flashed once, twice, 3 times, and by the time the echoes stopped ringing off the saloon walls, they were sprawled on the floorboards, their guns clattering away into the dark. 3 armed men came for her, certain they'd be the ones to collect her head and whatever bounty came with it. They were fast. She was faster. Steel flashed once, twice, 3 times, and by the time the echoes stopped ringing off the saloon walls, they were sprawled on the floorboards, their guns clattering away into the dark. The townsfolk didn't cheer. They didn't dare. They just stared, some with awe, some with a fear that stuck to the skin. You could see it in their eyes, they remembered the stories, and now they remembered she wasn't dead after all. From the doorway came the sheriff, his badge catching the lamplight. He didn't bother with threats. He offered her safe passage, leave now, and live. But she only smiled, that same quiet, dangerous smile she'd worn before the blood hit the floor. She wasn't leaving. Not yet. Not until the last dead in this town was paid in full. It began with the sound of hooves, distant, steady, too many to count. Folks in town went still, every hammer on every nail stopping mid-swing. Even the dogs ducked into alleys. The dust at the far end of Main Street swelled like a storm cloud, and inside it, shapes began to form. They came the way they always had, side by side, black coats billowing, faces set in that same cruel calm. The same men who'd once lit the night sky with the fire that ate her world alive. And now they were here, riding straight into hers. When they hit the heart of town, the street seemed to narrow, trapping everyone between the buildings and the heat of their presence. No greetings. No words. Only the heavy silence of old scores long overdue. Then, the first shot cracked the air wide open. Gunfire spilled like rain on tin roofs, glass shattered, boards splintered. The ground kicked up in bursts where bullets found dirt instead of bone. She moved through it all like a shadow in daylight, fast, unyielding, cutting a path toward the one man she'd been waiting to face. And then, in the smoke and thunder, she saw him, not the man who wronged her, but a boy, barely grown, gun shaking in his hand, eyes wide with the kind of fear she once knew too well. Her finger tightened on the trigger, and then loosened. She let him live, maybe because killing him would have meant killing what little piece of herself she still had left. By the time the smoke cleared, the street looked like the aftermath of a storm no one saw coming. Bodies lay still in the dust, some groaning, some silent. The wind carried the smell of gunpowder, hot iron, and something older, like blood on dry earth. She stood there, breathing hard but steady, the last echo of gunfire still ringing in her ears. Every man who'd come for her lay where they fell, except one. The leader. The one with the scar that cut across his grin like a warning. He was gone. Slipped through the cracks while the world was burning around them. The townsfolk peered from behind shutters, not sure if it was over or just pausing. They watched her walk into the saloon, boots heavy on the floorboards, spurs clicking in a rhythm that felt like a countdown. At the far wall, she pulled a single bullet from her belt. The metal caught the light, dull and deadly, and on its side was carved a single letter, S. She pressed it into the wood with the hammer of her gun until it stood there, gleaming, a promise no man could outrun. By nightfall, the story had ridden faster than any horse. Across canyons and rivers, through gambling halls and campfires, they whispered it. The outlaw queen was riding again. And somewhere out there, the man she was hunting, he'd hear her coming long before he saw her shadow.